It was a typical Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. The air was thick with anticipation as the clock ticked toward the start of the morning session. The usual hum of lawyers and clients discussing cases was interrupted only by the occasional clink of shoes on the marble floors. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Evelyn Parker was preparing for what seemed like another standard day of legal proceedings. But for her, every day was a battle. As one of the few black judges in a system historically stacked against people like her, Evelyn had to fight for respect, not just from the public, but from the very system she was sworn to uphold. She sat at the bench, her eyes scanning the files before her, but her mind was already running through the motions of the day. A low hum of voices outside the courtroom told her that a full docket awaited her. The first case was already ready to go, but just as the door opened and the court clerk began calling out names, something unusual happened. Officer Jake Lawson walked in with his typical swagger. He was tall, built like a linebacker, and had that look about him, the kind of look that told you he had seen it all and then some. White, in his early 30s, he had been with the police department for nearly a decade, and his reputation preceded him. Known for being tough on crime and tough on anything or anyone that got in his way. Today, though, his cocky grin was missing. Instead, there was a thinly veiled sense of irritation in the air. He walked down the aisle, his boots echoing with every step. But when his eyes met Evelyn's across the courtroom, there was something else, something darker that passed between them, like a storm cloud on the horizon. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't flinch. She had faced men like him before. Men who believed that power was theirs by birthright, that the system existed to serve them, and everyone else had better fall in line. "Officer Lawson, take your seat," Evelyn called out sharply, her voice clear and commanding. She didn't need to raise it. It was a voice that demanded attention. Lawson grunted, taking the stand where he was to testify in the trial of a young black man, Tyrone Harris, who was facing charges for a crime he hadn't committed. Evelyn had already read through the case files and knew there were glaring inconsistencies in Lawson's report. She had seen this before, a routine charge of resisting arrest, slapping a sentence on someone who was likely innocent just to meet a quota. The only difference today was that Tyrone had the guts to fight back, and the entire courtroom could feel it. "Your Honor," Lawson said, breaking the silence with a tone that was both arrogant and dismissive. "We both know how these cases go. I'm just here to make sure the law gets enforced." Evelyn's eyes narrowed further. There was something about the way he said it, something that made her blood run cold. She knew exactly what he was implying. "The law," she repeated, her voice colder than before. "And whose version of the law are we talking about, Officer Lawson?" He paused for a moment, clearly caught off guard by her words. He was used to people deferring to his authority, but Evelyn wasn't just anyone. She wasn't some weak-willed court figure who would be intimidated by a badge or a gun. Her job was to administer justice, not play along with the games that people like Lawson tried to play. "Don't play coy with me, Your Honor," Lawson sneered, his jaw tightening. "You know what I mean." Evelyn didn't flinch. "You're not in charge here, officer. I am. And if you plan to disrespect this court or this case in any way, you can find your way out." A few of the attorneys watching from the gallery shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't just a normal exchange between a judge and a witness. This was a battle of wills, a battle that was about to explode. Lawson, for a brief moment, looked like he might back down. But then, like a man who had been backed into a corner too many times, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "but don't act like this isn't personal." Evelyn's heart sank as she realized what he was insinuating. This wasn't just about the case at hand. This was about something much deeper. A power struggle, perhaps. And it wasn't just about her as a judge. It was about what she represented, a black woman in a seat of power, in a system designed to keep people like her down. "Take a seat, officer." "Lawson," she commanded again, this time with even more authority in her voice. She wasn't going to let him rile her up. She had too much at stake. She wouldn't let a racist cop shake her confidence. And yet, as he turned away, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was going to shatter today. A crack in the system was opening up, and she could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't just a courtroom, this was a battleground, and it was about to erupt. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The gavel came down, and the courtroom fell into a hushed silence. But Evelyn Parker wasn't paying attention to the case in front of her anymore. Her mind drifted back to a different time, a time when she had learned what it truly meant to fight. She could still remember growing up in the small, cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago, with peeling wallpaper and a window that always seemed to be on the verge of breaking. It was a world far removed from the polished halls of the courthouse. There, she had learned the value of resilience, of hard work, and of never giving up, even when the odds were stacked against you. Her father, James Parker, was a man of few words but infinite wisdom. He had been a janitor at a nearby high school, working long hours to provide for his family. Despite his exhaustion, he always made time to teach his children the most important lessons in life. It was James who had first opened Evelyn's eyes to the ugly realities of the world. He told her stories of how he'd been passed over for promotions simply because of his race, how despite his qualifications, he had watched white colleagues with less experience rise to the top. "You have to fight, baby girl," he would say in his gravelly voice, a voice worn from years of hard labor. "The world won't hand you anything, but if you work hard enough and smart enough, they can't keep you down forever." James was more than a father. He was a living testament to perseverance. Evelyn had seen him, day after day, face the harshness of a system that didn't care about his struggles. And yet, despite it all, he never wavered. He kept working, kept pushing, kept fighting. It was his strength that had planted the seeds of justice in her heart. Evelyn excelled in school, driven not only by her father's lessons, but by a fierce desire to prove that she could make a difference. She had seen firsthand how the system worked against people who looked like her. When she was in middle school, her best friend Lena had been unjustly suspended for something she hadn't done, simply because she was black. Lena's parents didn't have the resources to fight the school district, but Evelyn's father, despite having so little himself, had made sure Lena's family had the support they needed. They took the case to court, and after months of legal battles, Lena's suspension was overturned. The victory wasn't just for Lena. It was for all the kids like her who were targeted by a system that too often failed them. Evelyn knew then that she wanted to be the kind of person who could stand up for what was right. She wanted to be a judge who could change the system, who could help the people who were too often forgotten or ignored. After law school, Evelyn worked her way up through the ranks, facing more resistance than she'd ever imagined. As one of the few black women to graduate at the top of her class, she quickly realized that just because she had earned a seat at the table didn't mean she was welcome there. She was often passed over for promotions, ignored in meetings, and dismissed by colleagues who didn't believe a woman, let alone a black woman, belonged in the position she was in. But it was the work that kept her going. The idea that perhaps one day she could change the world just a little bit, one case at a time, and now here she was, a judge in a courtroom where the law was supposed to be colorblind, but rarely ever was. A courtroom where people like Officer Jake Lawson used their power to trample on the very people she fought for every day. Evelyn had faced racist comments, microaggressions, and outright discrimination throughout her career, but she'd never allowed it to break her. Every time someone tried to undermine her, she grew stronger. She had seen how the law could be manipulated, twisted, and corrupted, and it only reinforced her resolve to make sure justice was truly served. As she sat on the bench that morning, she thought of her father's words again, "They can't keep you down forever." And it was that promise that fueled her determination, because while she was one of the few people in the room who could see through the facade of respectability, she wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. Suddenly, her train of thought was interrupted by a loud, familiar voice. "Your Honor, I'm just saying we're all here to do our jobs, but some people don't deserve to be treated like this." She glanced up to see Officer Lawson standing with a smug expression, clearly trying to bait her. He was playing the same game he always played, using his power to provoke and manipulate. But Evelyn wasn't going to let him win, not today. "Officer Lawson," she began, her voice calm but firm. "You've made your point. Now let's stick to the facts. This isn't about personal feelings, this is about justice." Lawson shot her a challenging look, but didn't argue. He knew better than to escalate things further, for now at least. Evelyn's thoughts shifted back to her childhood, to her father's sacrifices, and to everything that had led her here. It wasn't just her career on the line today. It was a fight for something bigger, something more important than any one case. As the next witness was called to the stand, Evelyn steadied herself. She was ready to do what was right regardless of the consequences, because this was more than just a courtroom battle. It was about proving that the system could be better. It had to be. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Jake Lawson had always been the kind of guy who walked into a room and made his presence known. Whether it was at a party, a bar, or a courtroom, he commanded attention. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, but he had an air about him that made you feel like he was always in charge. His eyes, a cold steel grey, could intimidate without a single word. For him, authority was more than a job. It was a lifestyle. But beneath the hardened exterior, behind the uniform that pressed against his broad shoulders and the badge that glinted in the light, there was a history, a story that wasn't written in the case files or the reports. Jake's story started in a small town in Indiana, a place where the people were as conservative as the land was flat. His family had lived in the same house for generations, and as a kid, Jake had always been told he was destined for something great. He had the look, tall, muscular, blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of American poster child image that made people feel comfortable, made them feel like he was one of them. But while many saw that as a blessing, Jake had always found it a bit suffocating. His father, Doug Lawson, was a tough man, too tough for his own good. Doug had served in the military, and after his service, he worked a factory job until the industry collapsed and left him with nothing but bitterness and anger. It wasn't just the factory closing that left him wounded. It was the sense that the world had changed around him, leaving him behind. He wasn't the kind of man who adapted easily to change. He had trouble with the idea of progress, especially when it involved people who looked like him being told they had to share power with people who didn't. Jake's relationship with his father was complicated. His father wasn't abusive, at least not physically, but he could be emotionally distant. Doug never encouraged Jake to pursue his dreams, but he always pushed him to become someone who mattered. "You're going to be a cop, Jake," Doug would say. "You'll make a difference. You'll put the bad guys away. That's what the world needs." Jake didn't question it. After high school, he enlisted in the police academy and followed his father's advice, thinking it was the only path to respect and success. His life felt predictable. Everything from the badge on his chest to the uniform that fit just right seemed like a logical step forward. When he first joined the force, things were simple. He followed orders, kept his head down, and did his job. But as the years went by, something inside him changed, something darker. He started to notice things, patterns that others ignored. The people who were always caught in the system, the ones who didn't have a voice to fight back, they were mostly black, mostly poor. And every time Jake put someone in handcuffs or took them down, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction, more than the job required. He liked the control, the power. It felt like he was doing what he was born to do. At first, Jake didn't see it for what it was, the slow creep of racism that had been instilled in him from childhood. It wasn't explicit. It wasn't like his father sat him down and taught him to hate, but there was something in the way Doug would talk about black people, how they were asking for trouble, how they were more likely to cause problems, that had seeped into Jake's psyche without him even realizing it. Over time, those thoughts grew more normalized, more ingrained. It was subtle at first. Little things like how he would look at a black man on the street and feel a twinge of distrust, or how he was more likely to pull over a black driver for a routine check than anyone else. It was all justified in his mind. After all, he was just following procedure. He was keeping the streets safe, right? But there were moments that nagged at him, like the time he had been called to a scene where a black teenager, Tyrone Harris, had been stopped for a simple jaywalking charge. The teenager was calm, polite, far more cooperative than any teenager Jake had dealt with before. Yet something in Jake's gut told him to escalate things, so he did. Tyrone had been arrested for resisting arrest, a charge that was entirely fabricated just to meet the quota, and Jake had written the report like it was nothing. The case had been a wake-up call for Jake, but not in the way he had expected. In the back of his mind, the actions of that day gnawed at him, but the discomfort was easier to push aside. After all, the system had rewarded him for doing his job efficiently, and that meant he was right, wasn't he? But then there was the day when the rumors started to swirl. People started talking about the courthouse, about a judge who wasn't like the others. A black woman, no less. A woman who had earned her position, a woman who had fought tooth and nail to get there. Judge Evelyn Parker. Jake had heard stories. Some said she was tough as nails, that she didn't take any crap from anyone. Others said she was biased, that she favored the criminals. It was an open secret among the department that she had no love for cops like him. Jake never thought much of it until the day he walked into her courtroom, when he saw her for the first time, sitting at that bench with all the authority in the world. Something about it pissed him off. She was everything he had been taught to dismiss. A black woman holding the reins of power in a system meant to keep people like her in check. His instinct, his training, told him she wasn't supposed to be there. She was one of them, wasn't she? One of the people who just took advantage of the system, one of the people who resented his very existence. And yet, there she was, in full control of a room that should have been his. Jake sat in that courtroom, staring at Judge Parker with a quiet fury bubbling inside him. This wasn't just about a case, this was personal. He didn't know it yet. But that day, the day he first crossed paths with Evelyn Parker, would change the course of his life forever. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The case was dragging on, but Evelyn wasn't losing focus. The hours seemed to blur together in the courtroom. Case after case, witness after witness, the endless parade of facts, arguments, and objections, but none of it mattered. Not today. Today, the real fight was unfolding beneath the surface, between her and Officer Lawson. She could feel the tension, building with every exchange. The quiet glares, the subtle jabs, the power struggle. There was something about this case, about him, that felt different, and Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that it was about to explode. As the afternoon wore on, the clock ticked closer to the moment of reckoning. Officer Lawson had already taken the stand once, but Evelyn could tell that he was getting more agitated with every passing minute. The glances he shot her way grew sharper, and she could feel the disdain in the air. It wasn't just his testimony anymore. It was his pride. And pride, Evelyn knew, could be the most dangerous thing of all. The final witness of the day was called Tyrone Harris himself. Tyrone was young, barely 20, with wide eyes that had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. He had a quiet strength about him, though, something that spoke of resilience, of someone who wasn't going to let the system break him. Tyrone had been arrested for a crime he didn't commit, resisting arrest when all he had done was stand up for his rights. Evelyn had read the police report. It was riddled with contradictions, lies, and omissions. It was the kind of report that people like Officer Lawson wrote when they knew they could get away with it. Tyrone took the witness stand, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. Evelyn saw the fear in his eyes, but there was also something else, something that told her he wasn't going to back down. "Mr. Harris," Evelyn began, her voice steady but compassionate, "can you tell me what happened on the day of your arrest?" Tyrone took a deep breath before he began. "I was just walking down the street, Your Honor. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't bothering anyone. But then Officer Lawson pulled me over. He said I was resisting, but that's not what happened." Evelyn glanced over at Lawson, who was sitting at the defense table. His eyes locked on Tyrone with a cold intensity. The way he stared at the young man made Evelyn's skin crawl. There was no empathy in his gaze, only a sense of superiority, as if he was the judge, not her. Officer Lawson told you that you were resisting arrest? Evelyn asked, keeping her tone neutral. Yeah, Tyrone replied, his voice low but clear. But I never did. I just asked him why I was being stopped. I told him I knew my rights, and he flipped out. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground with my hands behind my back, and they were charging me. Evelyn could see the raw emotion in Tyrone's eyes. The frustration, the anger, the confusion. She had seen it before in other faces, in other young men who were caught in the same vicious cycle. People who didn't have the means to fight back, who were left at the mercy of a system that often didn't care about them. Did Officer Lawson offer any explanation for why you were stopped? Evelyn asked, her eyes now fixed on Lawson. No, Tyrone said, shaking his head. He didn't give me any explanation. He just said I was being difficult, like I was some kind of criminal for asking questions. Evelyn could feel the weight of the moment settling in her chest. She had been through this before, so many times, with so many other young men. Like Tyrone. She had heard the same stories, seen the same injustices, but this case felt different. It felt personal. And she could see that Lawson knew it too. Thank you, Mr. Harris, Evelyn said, her voice steady as she looked over at Lawson. You can step down. Tyrone nodded and walked back to his seat, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the true drama was just beginning. She turned her attention back to Lawson, who was now standing, adjusting his uniform as he prepared to take the stand once again. Your Honor, Lawson said, his voice oozing with confidence. I'd like to address the testimony we just heard. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Go ahead, Officer Lawson. I think we can all agree that Mr. Harris has a lot of emotions about this incident, Lawson said, his words laced with sarcasm. But the facts are clear. I followed procedure and I did my job. Mr. Harris resisted arrest. He was combative. I'm not saying he's a criminal, but he certainly didn't make things easy for us. Evelyn could feel the anger bubbling inside her, but she kept her composure. Are you saying that Mr. Harris physically resisted you, Officer Lawson? Yes, Your Honor, Lawson said with a straight face. He pulled away from me. He was defiant. And yet, Evelyn said, her voice rising slightly, you didn't mention any of that in your report. In fact, your report doesn't even describe the situation as combative. It simply states that Mr. Harris was detained for questioning, which, as we all know, is a very different thing from resisting arrest. There was a brief silence. Lawson's eyes flickered just for a moment before he quickly recovered his composure. Your Honor, with all due respect, I'm just telling you what happened, he said, his tone now defensive. I had to do what I did to keep the peace. The room grew quiet, and Evelyn could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just about one case. This was about a system that allowed men like Lawson to get away with this behavior. It was about the lies, the manipulation, and the way that power was wielded by those who had it, and how it was used to crush those who didn't. Evelyn took a deep breath, then spoke with a calm but unyielding authority. I've heard enough, Officer Lawson. You may step down. As Lawson turned and returned to his seat, Evelyn locked eyes with him for just a moment. There was a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe fear, but she couldn't be sure. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her, not anymore. This was bigger than him. This was bigger than the case at hand. This was about something that was long overdue, a reckoning. And Evelyn Parker was going to see it through. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The courtroom was dead silent. The kind of silence that sent shivers down your spine. It wasn't the calm, peaceful silence one might expect after a hard-fought argument. It was thick with anticipation, with the weight of what was coming next, and Evelyn Parker could feel it deep in her bones. Officer Lawson had just taken his seat after his tense exchange with her. His face flushed but masked with feigned indifference. He was angry. She could see it in the twitch of his jaw, the way his knuckles gripped the edge of the table, as though it was the only thing keeping him from snapping. But Evelyn was unshaken. If anything, the unease from the defendant's side was just the confirmation she needed. She was hitting the mark. The case had now reached the point of no return. The arguments had been laid out, the testimonies given. There was no more dancing around the truth. No more pretending that the actions of Officer Lawson were anything but a calculated abuse of power. But still, there was one final moment that Evelyn knew was coming, one that would test her resolve like never before. "So, Your Honor," came a voice from the defense table, breaking the silence. It was Officer Lawson, standing again. "I request that we take a recess." Evelyn's gaze snapped to him, her face unreadable. "A recess?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Why?" His eyes flashed with something more than just irritation. It was almost a challenge. "I believe the prosecution has painted an unfair picture of my conduct. I need some time to—" He cut himself off, not willing to reveal his full thoughts, but the intent was clear. He was trying to throw off her rhythm, make her second-guess herself. Evelyn stood firm. She had dealt with enough men like Lawson to know exactly what he was doing. It wasn't about a break for him. It was about taking control of the room once more, about shifting the power, and Evelyn wasn't having it. "No recess," she replied coldly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "We've heard the evidence. The case continues." Lawson opened his mouth to argue, but Evelyn's gaze sharpened, silencing him before he could speak. "We'll proceed with closing statements," she said firmly, "unless you have something substantial to add, Officer Lawson." His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment Evelyn thought he might lash out, but he only nodded stiffly, returning to his seat. He knew that the walls were closing in. She had taken away his advantage, and now he was left with nothing but his words, and she hoped his conscience. As she looked across the room, Evelyn's eyes found Tyrone again. The young man was sitting on the edge of his seat, his body tense, waiting for the final word. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the fear, the years of struggle. He was waiting for something that might never come, something that was so elusive it might as well be a dream. Justice. But Evelyn was determined to make it real for him. "Officer Lawson," Evelyn said, her voice steady but laced with finality. "You've made your case, and now the time has come to answer for your actions. We cannot continue to allow this kind of behavior to persist without consequences." She glanced at the jury, every one of them hanging on her every word. She knew they felt it too, the heaviness of the situation, the responsibility that lay in their hands. Their verdict could mean everything. The prosecutor stepped forward next, ready to deliver his closing argument, but Evelyn's mind was elsewhere. It was as if everything had gone still. Every detail of the courtroom, every person sitting there, every thought she had was focused on one thing: ending the cycle. Lawson had lied. He had manipulated the system to his advantage, and it was time to put a stop to it. The prosecutor's voice broke through her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "the facts have been laid out before you. Officer Lawson's conduct on the day of the arrest was not only unjust, but it was also an abuse of power. Tyrone Harris did not deserve what happened to him. He did not deserve to be humiliated, intimidated, and falsely accused. And yet that is exactly what Officer Lawson did." Evelyn could see Lawson's face growing darker as the prosecutor continued. His eyes were narrowed, his jaw clenched. He was losing control, and it showed. Officer Lawson violated the very oath he took to protect and serve. He manipulated the truth, and now it's time for him to answer for that. We cannot allow the actions of a single officer to go unchecked. It sets a dangerous precedent, not just for this courtroom, but for every citizen who puts their trust in the justice system. The prosecutor's words rang clear in the air, but Evelyn knew that it wasn't just about the words. It was about the power of the moment. It was about sending a message to everyone in that room. Justice wasn't something you could just bend to your will. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about what was right. As the prosecutor finished, Evelyn turned her gaze back to Lawson, who was now sitting with his head lowered, his fists clenched tightly. She could almost see the battle playing out in his mind. He was fighting with everything he had left. He wanted to shout, he wanted to lash out, but he knew deep down that it was too late. The truth was catching up to him, and then it came. The question that had been hanging in the air since the moment Lawson first stepped into her courtroom. "Officer Lawson," Evelyn said, her voice breaking the stillness, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" The room fell silent. The tension reached its peak. For a moment, Lawson didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching, ever so slightly, as if searching for something to hold on to. And then, finally, he stood, slowly, methodically. His eyes met Evelyn's. For a fleeting second, there was something there. Something real. "I was just doing my job," he muttered, barely audible, the words tumbling out like a confession, not one of guilt, but of self-preservation. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want this." Evelyn didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She didn't react, because she knew exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to make it all go away, trying to absolve himself of the consequences. But Evelyn wasn't going to let him. She wouldn't let this man escape the truth. "This is not about intent, Officer Lawson," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "This is about accountability. You have a responsibility to the people you serve. You took an oath to protect them, and when you break that oath, there are consequences." He stood there deflated, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. And for the first time, Evelyn saw him for what he truly was, a man backed into a corner, desperate to hold on to whatever little control he had left. But it wasn't going to be enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Evelyn stood, poised and calm, as the final arguments for the day began to unfold. But something was different now. The weight of the situation had shifted, and Officer Lawson, who had been so confident just days ago, now seemed like a man who had lost his footing. The judge looked out over the room, scanning the faces of the jury, the prosecutor, and the defense team. Evelyn could see the tension etched into the jury's expressions. They had been through a lot already, and now they were facing the culmination of all the hours of testimony, all the hidden truths, all the lies. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had seen it before. The pressure of the final moments when everything depended on the jury's decision. But she knew something the jury didn't. She knew the truth. And truth, in her experience, had a way of coming out in the end. No matter how much someone tried to bury it. The defense attorney stepped forward, his voice breaking the uneasy silence that had settled over the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "I ask you to look at the facts here. Officer Lawson was simply doing his job. He was in a situation where he had to make a split-second decision. The defendant, Mr. Harris, was not cooperative. He resisted arrest. And yet you've heard testimony that paints Officer Lawson as something he is not. A man who has served his community with honor and integrity." Evelyn heard the words, but they were hollow to her. The defense attorney's voice was smooth, his arguments rehearsed, but there was a desperation in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. He was trying to spin a story, one where Officer Lawson was the hero and Tyrone Harris was the villain. But Evelyn wasn't buying it. She was too far down the road now to back off. She couldn't stop, not when she knew what was at stake. Not when she knew the system was counting on her. As the defense attorney continued, Evelyn's mind wandered, her thoughts swirling like a storm in her head. She thought of her own journey. She thought of the struggles she'd faced growing up, struggles that had shaped her sense of justice. She thought of her father, a civil rights activist who had always told her that justice was not something you could find by sitting back and waiting for it to come to you. You had to go out and fight for it, even when it seemed like the odds were against you. Her father's words had always stuck with her. And now, standing in this courtroom, Evelyn knew that this was her moment to honor them. "Your Honor," the defense attorney concluded, "we ask you to consider the entire picture. Officer Lawson is a dedicated public servant, and he was simply responding to a situation where he felt his safety was at risk. He did not act out of malice, he acted out of necessity." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She could feel the anger rising in her chest, but she channeled it, focusing on the task at hand. She wasn't going to let this man, this officer, get away with his lies. The prosecutor rose to make his closing statement, his voice steady but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to look beyond the words you've heard today. We have all been told that Officer Lawson acted in good faith, but actions speak louder than words. The evidence is clear. The reports are inconsistent. The testimonies contradictory. Officer Lawson did not act out of necessity. He acted out of arrogance and entitlement. Evelyn could feel the power of the prosecutor's words, and for a moment, she almost allowed herself to breathe a little easier. She knew they had done everything they could to expose the truth, to show the jury what was really at stake here. Mr. Harris did not resist arrest, the prosecutor continued, his voice gaining strength. He was a young man simply standing up for his rights. What happened that day was not an arrest. It was an attack on his dignity, his rights, and his freedom. And now it's up to you to decide whether we as a society are going to allow this kind of abuse to go unchecked. Evelyn could see the defense attorney's face contort with frustration. He had no more tricks left to play. It was all on the jury now. The room was silent again. The moment had arrived. The jury filed out to deliberate, and the tension in the air could be cut with a knife. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the empty jury box. It was in their hands now. The weight of it all settled in. The enormity of what was at stake, more than just the fate of one officer or one man, but the fate of a system that was too often broken. She had seen it too many times. The small injustices, the little slips, the times when people just let things slide. And for what? To avoid the discomfort of facing hard truths? To avoid challenging the system that had been in place for so long? Evelyn wouldn't let that happen. Not today. Not on her watch. The minutes stretched on like hours. The sound of the jury shuffling in the hall, murmurs, the low hum of voices outside. It felt like an eternity before the door opened, and the foreman of the jury stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice unwavering, "we have reached a verdict." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stood, every muscle in her body tense. The moment was here. The judge nodded, gesturing for the jury to read their decision. The foreman cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the defendant, then to Evelyn before speaking. "We, the jury, find Officer Lawson guilty of misconduct in office and excessive use of force in the arrest of Mr. Tyrone Harris." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. They had done it. The jury had spoken. But as the verdict settled in, she couldn't help but wonder, was this really the victory she'd hoped for, or was it just the beginning of an even greater struggle? The gavel struck. A resounding final sound that echoed in Evelyn's ears long after the judge's voice had faded. Guilty. It wasn't just a verdict, it was a shift, a moment that sent shockwaves through the room. The ripple effect had already begun. The room erupted with murmurs, gasps, and a low, tense buzz. Some whispered in disbelief, others in approval. Officer Lawson stood frozen, his face ashen, eyes wide in a mixture of anger and disbelief. He had thought, no, believed that he could walk out of this unscathed, but that belief shattered with the weight of the jury's decision. Evelyn, however, stood still, her gaze unwavering, focused on the officer who had caused so much harm. She had fought tooth and nail for this moment, and while the victory was sweet, the emptiness still lingered, because she knew it was far from over. She had done the hard part, but the battle was just beginning. The judge's voice called out again, loud and clear, breaking the heavy silence. "Officer Lawson, you will be taken into custody immediately. A sentencing hearing will be scheduled in due course. You are dismissed for now." Lawson didn't move immediately. For a moment it seemed like he was trying to process what had just happened, his mind racing through every possible escape route. But there was nowhere to go now. His fate was sealed, and as the bailiff approached him, handcuffs clicking into place, the room fell into an eerie quiet. The clinking sound of the handcuffs, once a distant, almost mechanical sound, now felt like an agonizing drumbeat that echoed Evelyn's thoughts. She couldn't help but watch as he was led away. She had known this moment was coming, but now, that it was here, she realized just how hollow the victory felt. It was a small triumph in a system that often failed those who needed it most. As the courtroom cleared, Evelyn lingered, her thoughts scattered. Tyrone's family had been in the front row, and she knew they were watching this moment with a complex blend of emotions. Relief, yes, but also something darker, a bitter taste that came with the realization that no matter how much the system worked, it could never fully heal the wounds it had caused. Evelyn stepped outside into the cool air, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the city. Her car was parked across the street, and she needed a moment to herself before heading home. She sat on the steps outside the courthouse, letting the quiet calm of the city wash over her. The sounds of passing cars, the distant chatter of pedestrians, all of it felt like a world that hadn't yet come to grips with the weight of what had just happened. And then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Tyrone's mother, a woman who had become a symbol of resilience throughout this entire process. "Thank you, Evelyn. You've done more than just win a case. You've given us hope. We'll never forget this." Evelyn's heart tightened. She knew what it meant to stand for something, to fight for justice. But seeing those words, knowing that the victory had meant something to a family that had been torn apart, that was what kept her going. That was what made the weight of the case worth it. She stood up and took a deep breath. As much as this moment felt like the end of a chapter, it was only the beginning of something bigger. The case had brought the issues of police misconduct and systemic failure to the forefront, but it had also illuminated something deeper, a society in need of change, a world where justice was still an ideal, not a reality for everyone. She had done her part, but Evelyn knew that this victory wasn't a full stop. It was a comma in a much longer sentence. Lawson's conviction would shake the foundation of the police department, but the real question was, would it be enough? Would this case be the catalyst for broader reforms? Or would the system try to bury the truth as it so often did? Before she could ponder too long, the soft sound of footsteps reached her ears. She turned to see Tyrone walking toward her. He was taller than she remembered, his movements slower, more deliberate. He wasn't the young man who had walked into that courtroom days ago. The journey had changed him. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Words seemed insufficient in the face of everything that had happened. "Thank you," Tyrone said softly, his voice rough but filled with something powerful. Gratitude, yes, but also something more, a sense of closure. "You did the hard part." "Tyrone," Evelyn replied, her voice steady but full of warmth. "You gave the truth a chance to be heard." He nodded, his gaze lowering briefly. "I don't know what this all means yet," he said, more to himself than to her. "But it feels like the world might change a little, even if it's just a little." Evelyn could see it. The hope that had been sparked in him, the same hope that had driven her to become a lawyer in the first place, the hope that sometimes, against all odds, things could be different. "You're right," she said quietly. "Even a little change can have a ripple effect. And it starts with people like you standing up and saying no more." Tyrone looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "I don't know if I'm ready for all that yet, but I'm ready to try. I'm ready to keep fighting." And in that moment, Evelyn knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead would be, they had already started something much bigger than the courtroom. The ripple had begun. The system had been challenged, the truth had been spoken, and now the fight for justice had a new face, a face that wasn't going to back down. As she walked away, the sun sinking low in the sky, Evelyn couldn't help but think about her father's words again. "Justice isn't a destination," he had always said. "It's a journey, and every journey starts with one small step." Today had been a step, but tomorrow and the day after that, the journey would continue, and Evelyn Parker was ready for the next battle. The morning after the verdict, Evelyn woke up to the soft hum of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the trial over and over, wondering what would come next. The weight of the case was still heavy on her shoulders, and though she felt a sense of relief, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. She reached for her phone, still half-dazed from lack of sleep, and opened the barrage of messages and notifications that greeted her. Most were supportive, friends, colleagues, even strangers reaching out with congratulations. But one message stood out among the rest. It was from an anonymous number. "Enjoy the victory while it lasts. We know who you really are. The real fight is coming, and we'll make sure you never forget it. Stay in your lane or there'll be consequences." Evelyn's stomach dropped as she read the chilling message. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline flood her veins, her senses sharpening. Threats weren't new to her. She'd encountered her share over the years, but this one felt different, more personal. A reminder that the battle for justice was never straightforward, and that it came with enemies who would do whatever it took to protect their own. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to let fear dictate her actions, but at the same time she knew this was serious. The forces that had been silent during the trial were beginning to stir, and she wasn't sure what kind of storm she was about to face. After a deep breath, she turned the phone over and set it aside. She wasn't going to let this intimidate her. She couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she'd fought for. Later that afternoon, Evelyn was sitting at her desk, going through case files and preparing for the next stage in the legal battle when her assistant Mia knocked on the door. "Miss Parker, there's a call for you. It's the mayor's office. They want to discuss something important regarding your recent case." Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She stood up and walked over to her office phone, picking up the receiver. "Evelyn Parker speaking." "Ms. Parker, this is Mayor Wilson," came the voice on the other end of the line. The mayor's voice was calm, measured, but there was an undertone of urgency that Evelyn couldn't ignore. "I just wanted to congratulate you on the verdict in the Lawson case. It's been a long time coming." "Thank you, Mayor." "It wasn't just me. It was the whole team and, of course, the jury who saw the truth," Evelyn replied, her tone professional but guarded. "Of course. But I'm calling because, well, I need to make sure you're prepared for the fallout," Mayor Wilson said, lowering his voice slightly. "There are powerful people who are not happy with how this turned out. And I'm not just talking about the police union. There are higher-ups who are already making calls. They're not going to let this go easily." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it from the mayor's mouth made it feel real. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a political one, and the stakes had just been raised. "I'm not backing down," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of thoughts swirling in her mind. "I've seen this kind of pushback before. But we did the right thing. I'm not going to let anyone intimidate me into silence." There was a pause on the other end, and when the mayor spoke again, his voice was softer, almost reluctant. "I understand. But I want you to be careful, Evelyn. You've made an enemy out of some very powerful people, and right now it's not just your career on the line, it's your safety. Things could get messy." Evelyn gripped the edge of her desk, her heart pounding. She had always known that standing up for justice came with risks. But hearing the mayor's warning made it feel more real, more immediate. She had been willing to sacrifice everything for what was right. But now, she realized, she might have to pay a higher price than she had anticipated. "I appreciate your concern, Mayor, but I'm not afraid," she said, her voice firmer now. "I didn't get into this line of work to back down when things got tough." "Just be careful," the mayor repeated before hanging up. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. But the threats, the pushback, it was clear that there were forces in play that would do everything they could to bury the truth and protect their own interests. She had never been naive about the system, but the reality of how deep the corruption went was sinking in. That evening, Evelyn met with Tyrone and his mother, Rosa, to discuss the next steps. The victory had been bittersweet, and both of them knew that the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. "Tyrone, Rosa," Evelyn began, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm going to be honest with you. This case was a small victory, but there's a lot more work to be done. We've made some powerful people angry, and we're going to feel that pushback. I don't want to scare you, but I want you to be prepared." Tyrone looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "We're ready, Evelyn. We've already been through too much to back down now." Rosa nodded in agreement, her hands gripping her purse tightly. "You've done what no one else would, Evelyn. You've given us hope, and we're with you all the way." Evelyn smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to stay united. We can't let them divide us. This fight isn't just for Tyrone, it's for everyone who's been let down by the system," Tyrone stood up, determination in his eyes. Then let's keep fighting. We're not done yet. Evelyn nodded, her resolve strengthening. She knew the road ahead would be even more challenging than before, but she was ready for it. The pushback was inevitable, but it wasn't enough to stop her. Not now. As she left the meeting, the weight of the situation hung heavy on her shoulders, but there was something else too, the fire of determination. The struggle for justice was far from over, and Evelyn Parker was just getting started. The phone calls and messages didn't stop after the mayor's warning. Every time Evelyn picked up her phone, there was another threat, another subtle reminder that the people she was up against weren't about to let things slide. At first, they came in the form of anonymous texts, thinly veiled warnings that felt more like taunts than actual threats. Then came the emails, one after another, each message more chilling than the last. But it was the phone call that truly sent her. Heart racing. It was late on a Thursday night when her phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. She hesitated, staring at it for a few seconds before answering. "Hello?" A voice on the other end, smooth and calculated, replied, "Ms. Parker. I must say, I'm impressed. You've made quite the name for yourself. But I'm afraid your newfound fame has consequences." Evelyn's stomach turned. She recognized the voice, or at least the tone. It was someone who didn't need to introduce themselves, someone who had the power to make things happen, or to make them disappear. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. But her heart was hammering in her chest. "You don't need to know who I am," the voice responded. "But I think you know what's at stake now. You've riled up the wrong people, Evelyn. You've poked the bear, and now you'll see what happens when you try to take it down." Evelyn felt a cold chill creep down her spine. She had expected resistance, but this was something else. This was personal. She had crossed a line, and now it seemed like there were forces aligned against her that went far beyond the police department. There were powerful people, people who pulled strings behind the scenes, people who were willing to use everything at their disposal to silence her. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, trying to sound calm but feeling the heat of fear creeping up her throat. The voice on the other end chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "I'm not threatening you, Ms. Parker. I'm just giving you a chance to reconsider. This case, it's not worth your life. Walk away while you still can." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "I don't walk away, not from something this important." "Very well," the voice said, as if her refusal had been expected. "Then we'll see how long you hold out. Good luck, Ms. Parker. You'll need it." The line went dead, leaving only a silence that pressed against her ears. Her fingers trembled as she slowly hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. It wasn't just an idle threat. Whoever had made that call was powerful. And they were watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Evelyn didn't want to be afraid. She knew fear was the enemy of progress, and she couldn't afford to give in to it. But deep down, she knew this was no longer just about winning a legal case. This was about survival. The next day, Evelyn met with her team, gathering them in her office to discuss their next steps. They all knew the stakes had just gotten much higher. "We've got to be careful," Evelyn said, her voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her words. "There are people out there who will stop at nothing to protect the system. They're making it clear they'll go after anyone who gets in their way." Mia, her assistant, sat across from her, her brow furrowed. "What do you think we should do?" "We need to be prepared," Evelyn replied, her eyes scanning the faces of everyone in the room. "This isn't just about law anymore. It's about making sure we can keep fighting without being taken out of the game early. We can't afford to make any missteps." One of the other lawyers, Mark, leaned forward. "What's our next move with Lawson? We need to prepare for the sentencing hearing, but also, I'm starting to wonder if there's more at play here than just him." Evelyn nodded. "There's definitely more. Lawson was just a pawn in a much bigger game. The question is, who else is involved? And how far are they willing to go to protect their own?" They all sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their realizations sinking in. They weren't just up against one corrupt officer. They were up against an entire system, one that was willing to defend its own at all costs. "You're right," Evelyn said finally, "but we can't back down. Not now. We've already started something and we're not stopping until it's done." As the day wore on, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was subtle at first, just a sense that something was off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the unease settled deep within her. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, she felt as if someone was there. Every time she left her office, she looked around to make sure she wasn't being followed. But it was when she returned to her car that the true extent of the threat became clear. The tires had been slashed. Her heart skipped a beat as she stood frozen in front of her vehicle, staring at the deflated rubber. Someone had been here. Someone who didn't want her to keep going. Someone who wanted her to feel the fear that came with knowing that the people you were fighting against weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Evelyn took a deep breath, pushing the panic that surged within her aside. She wouldn't let them intimidate her. This was just another obstacle in the road. But she couldn't ignore it. Someone was sending her a message. She called the police, though she didn't expect much. There was no real evidence to go on, no clear indication of who was responsible, but it didn't matter. She knew now that she had to be even more careful. The stakes had been raised, and they were no longer just fighting for justice. They were fighting for their very survival. As Evelyn stood there, watching the police officer inspect her car, she couldn't help but think of the phone call the night before. The threats, the people who were trying to stop her from pushing forward. But she wasn't going to stop, not now. Not when everything was finally starting to change. The days following the slashed tires were a blur for Evelyn. The small details of life that had once seemed so important now felt insignificant in the face of what was unfolding. Each step she took seemed to be weighed down by a heavy sense of unease. The threats were escalating, and the people behind them were making it clear that they wouldn't let her go unchallenged. Despite the tension, Evelyn couldn't allow herself to be consumed by fear. She had work to do. There were still lives at stake, still a justice to be served. Every day she spent hours in court filing motions, meeting with clients and working tirelessly to prepare for the coming legal battles. The Lawson case wasn't just a victory. It was a symbol, a turning point, and Evelyn couldn't afford to lose that momentum. But something felt different. The moment she stepped into the courtroom, the air seemed to change. There was a palpable tension in the room, whispers that traveled between the gallery and the benches, glances exchanged between those who were supposed to be impartial, and then there was him, Detective Wade Brooks. He had always been a presence in the courtroom, sitting with the other officers, his face unreadable, his gaze often fixed on the defendant. But today, as Evelyn stepped to the podium to address the judge, she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were fixed solely on her. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her skin crawl. Evelyn squared her shoulders and focused on the matter at hand, forcing herself to ignore the feeling of being watched. She had been in this position too many times to let one person rattle her. After court, Evelyn's day didn't get any easier. She returned to her office to find another message waiting for her, this one even more threatening than the last. The words were simple, but the message was clear. "You're crossing a line, Evelyn. You have no idea what you've started, but we'll finish it. Just remember, we don't play by the rules." She didn't have time to process it before Mia rushed in, her face pale. "Evelyn, you need to see this." Mia handed her a folder, her hands shaking slightly. Evelyn opened it without hesitation, knowing that whatever it was, it wouldn't be good. It was a photograph, a picture of her house, taken from across the street. In the image, her front door was visible, along with the faint shadow of a figure, standing just out of view. Her stomach dropped. "They're watching me," Evelyn murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Mia nodded. "This isn't just about the case anymore, Evelyn. This is personal." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic from rising in her chest. "What do we do?" "We need to go public," Mia suggested, her voice firm. "If people know what's happening, if they know you're being targeted, then they can't hide in the shadows anymore. We need to expose them." Evelyn considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "We're not there yet. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of showing fear, not yet." But inside, Evelyn knew that her options were growing slimmer. She was walking a tightrope now, each step more dangerous than the last. She couldn't afford to make a wrong move. Later that night, as Evelyn walked through her front door, The weight of the day settled heavily on her shoulders. The house was quiet, too quiet. She locked the door behind her, double-checking the security system as she set down her bag and moved toward the kitchen. But as soon as she turned the corner, she froze. There, on the kitchen counter, was a letter. No envelope, just the paper, folded neatly in half. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, picking it up with trembling fingers. She unfolded it slowly, reading the words that were scrawled across the page. "You're too close, Evelyn. Too close to the truth. And the truth has consequences." The letter wasn't signed, but she knew deep down who it was from. The same people who had been lurking in the shadows, pulling strings behind the scenes. The same people who were willing to go to any length to keep the truth buried. She crumpled, the letter in her hand, her anger flaring. This wasn't just a threat, this was a warning. And it was one that Evelyn wasn't going to take lying down. The next morning, Evelyn woke up with a single thought in her mind. She had crossed the line. There was no going back now. As she prepared for another day in court, the reality of her situation settled in. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore, she was a target. The people who had been trying to intimidate her were closing in, and she was starting to feel the pressure in every move she made. It wasn't just her career on the line. It was her safety, her family's safety. And she couldn't stop now, Evelyn's. Meeting with Tyrone and Rosa later that day was brief, but the sense of urgency in the room was undeniable. Evelyn could see the worry in their eyes, the same fear that had begun to creep into her own heart. They had seen what had happened to her car, to the messages. They knew what this was starting to feel like. "We can't just sit back and wait for them to make a move," Tyrone said, his voice firm. "We need to take control of this. We can't let them intimidate us." Rosa, who had been quiet until now, nodded. "I agree, but how? We don't know who's behind all this. They could be anyone." "I know," Evelyn said, her voice grim, "but we have to keep moving forward. We've already come too far to stop now. The system might be trying to shut us down, but we can't let them. Not when we're this close." Tyrone placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've got your back, Evelyn. You don't have to do this alone." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Thank you, but we need to be smarter. We can't go in blind." As the conversation continued, Evelyn's mind kept drifting. Back to the anonymous messages, the letter on her counter, and the constant feeling that someone was always watching. She had crossed the line into something much bigger than herself, and there was no turning back now. But that didn't mean she was going to stop. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. She glanced down and saw the number flashing on the screen, an unknown one. She hesitated for a second before answering. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was low and familiar. "You've made your choice, Evelyn. Now let's see how long you can last." The line went dead. Evelyn stared at her phone, her pulse racing. There was no more pretending, no more acting like she was just a lawyer fighting for justice. She was in the fight of her life now, and there were no rules. The next few days felt like a fog, thick with pressure and the looming sense of danger. Evelyn's usual routine had become a tense balancing act, one where every decision felt like it could tip the scales. Her thoughts were clouded with the constant awareness that someone was out there, watching, waiting, maybe even planning the next move. Each time she stepped into the courtroom, her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for any familiar faces, any hint of someone with ulterior motives. But today was different. As Evelyn walked into the courthouse for another round of hearings, the air felt heavier than usual. The usual hum of the building, lawyers in the hallways, clerks scurrying between offices, the sound of gavel strikes echoing through the chambers, seemed muted. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath, awaiting something. She didn't like it. Sitting in the courtroom waiting for the judge to arrive, she glanced at the defense table. For the first time in weeks, she didn't see Detective Wade Brooks in his usual spot behind the officers. Instead, there was a man sitting in his place, someone unfamiliar. He was older, with graying hair and a steely expression, his suit impeccably tailored. Evelyn's instincts went on high alert. She knew she had to keep her head down. She couldn't afford to make a scene, not with her every move being scrutinized. But something about this new presence unsettled her. He didn't look like someone who was just passing through. He looked like someone who had been sent there with a purpose. Her thoughts were interrupted when the judge entered, signaling the start of the session. As the proceedings began, Evelyn kept one eye on the unfamiliar man and the other on the trial at hand. The case had moved beyond just the immediate legal matters now. It was a chess game, and Evelyn was beginning to realize that the pieces on the board weren't just other lawyers and witnesses. There were bigger players involved, people who would stop at nothing to make sure the outcome of this case was what they wanted. As the hearing wore on, Evelyn's discomfort only deepened. The man at the defense table was watching her, his gaze fixed on her in a way that made her skin crawl. He hadn't taken his eyes off her for the entire session, and it was starting to feel deliberate. She shifted in her seat, trying to focus on the case, but it was impossible to ignore the tension in the room. The whispers had started again, soft mutterings from the gallery, murmurs she couldn't quite make out, but enough to make her feel exposed. They were talking about her. She could feel it. When the recess was finally called, Evelyn made a beeline for her office, hoping to regain some semblance of normalcy. She couldn't think, couldn't focus, with this new layer of paranoia weighing on her. As she entered her office, she was relieved to find Mia sitting at her desk, working on the case files. "Hey," Evelyn said, trying to sound calm, but her voice betrayed the unease she was feeling. "I need to talk to you." Mia looked up, her brow furrowing. "What's wrong?" Evelyn took a deep breath, pacing the room. "There's someone in the courtroom today. A man I've never seen before. And he's been watching me." Mia stood up, concern flashing in her eyes. "Do you think it's someone connected to the case?" "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her mind racing. "But it feels like they've sent him. He's not just a random observer. He's too calculated. I don't trust him." Mia walked over to the window, looking out at the street below. "You think they're sending a message?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. She knew the truth. The people behind. The threats, the intimidation. They were making sure she knew they were in control. They wanted to remind her that she was expendable, that if she wasn't careful, she would be the one who paid the price. "I need to find out who he is," Evelyn said finally, her voice hardening. "We can't afford to sit back and wait for them to make the next move. We need to take control of the situation." Mia nodded. "I'll dig into it, see if I can find anything about him. But be careful, Evelyn. We don't know who's behind this, and the last thing we need is to draw more attention to ourselves." Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. She already knew how high the stakes were. She wasn't just fighting for a case anymore. She was fighting for her life. The next day, as Evelyn walked into the courtroom, she felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The courtroom buzzed with the usual activity, but it was as if the entire space was holding its breath, waiting for something. As she sat down, she noticed that the unfamiliar man was still there, still watching her, his steely gaze unwavering. Her palms were sweaty as she glanced down at her notes, trying to focus. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. She could sense the tension growing between her and this man, as if they were engaged in some kind of silent battle. Just then, the door to the courtroom opened, and in walked Detective Wade Brooks, his eyes scanning the room. His expression was unreadable, but Evelyn couldn't help but notice the way his jaw clenched when his gaze landed on her. She knew he had been following her every move, and this time, it seemed like he was more than just a passive observer. It felt like he was waiting for the right moment to make his move. The judge called the court to order, and Evelyn forced herself to pay attention to the proceedings. But it was hard. The more she tried to focus on the trial, the more distracted. She became by the feeling of eyes on her, the feeling that something was wrong. After court, Evelyn's unease only deepened. As she walked out of the courthouse, she felt the familiar weight of someone following her, though when she glanced over her shoulder, no one was there. It was as if she had imagined it. But the feeling lingered. At home, Evelyn checked the locks on every door and window, ensuring that no one had gotten in. She hadn't felt this paranoid in a long time. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about everything she had built, her career, her reputation, her future, all of it was at risk. The people she was up against weren't playing by the rules, and neither could she. That night, as she sat down to her dinner, her phone buzzed. A text message, "We're watching you." Her heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of the words pressing down on her. There was no longer any doubt. The people behind this, whoever they were making it personal. They weren't just trying to win a case. They were trying to crush her. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She was in this now, whether she liked it or not, and the only way out was forward. Evelyn couldn't sleep. The shadows in her room felt thicker than usual, as though they were closing in around her, the walls of her sanctuary shrinking with each passing minute. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light, sent her heart into a race. She had been living like this for days, on edge, unable to shake the feeling that someone was always watching her. She was no longer just a lawyer trying to win a case. She was a target, and the stakes had never been higher. That night, her phone buzzed again, a message from Mia. "I've got something. Meet me at the office first thing tomorrow. It's big." Evelyn exhaled sharply, forcing herself to push the rising panic down. She had to stay focused, had to trust that Mia was on her side. If Mia had found something, it could be the break they needed. She had to get to the bottom of who was behind all of this before it was too late. The next morning, Evelyn was at her office before the sun had even fully risen. She was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to waste any more time. She needed answers. Mia was already there when Evelyn arrived, her face grim as she sat at the desk, flipping through a stack of papers. "What did you find?" Evelyn asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Mia didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed Evelyn a folder, her hands trembling slightly. Evelyn opened it carefully, scanning the documents inside. "What am I looking at?" she asked, confusion rising as she flipped through pages of seemingly routine legal paperwork. "These are records from the defense's side," Mia said, her voice low. "I hacked into the system to pull them up. You were right. They're playing dirty." Evelyn's fingers froze on the papers as she pieced together the puzzle. The documents weren't just related to the case she was working on. They went much deeper. Some of the files contained internal police records, others were notes on various witnesses, and there were several detailed reports about her personal life, things that no one should have had access to. "This is insane," Evelyn whispered, the realization hitting her like a ton of bricks. "They've been following me, watching me every step of the way. They know everything." "Yes," Mia replied. "And it's not just about the case anymore. They've got eyes on you, Evelyn. They've been tracking your movements, your relationships. They're trying to make sure you don't win, but they're also trying to break you. This is personal. They're going after your life now, not just your career." Evelyn's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a few threats from an anonymous source. This was an organized campaign to break her, and they were getting closer to their goal. She clenched her fists, her anger flaring. "Who is it, Mia? Who is behind all of this?" Mia didn't answer immediately. She sat back, her gaze distant. "I'm still trying to trace the connections, but there's something I don't get. Detective Wade Brooks, he's been involved in so many of these cases. He has ties to people in the department who are known for covering up their tracks. But it's more than just him. There's someone else, someone higher up, pulling the strings. I think Brooks might be working for them." Evelyn's mind spun as she absorbed this new information. Brooks had been involved in every step of the case, so far, but she had never once suspected he might be involved in something more sinister. She had always assumed he was just another cog in the machine, but now she wasn't so sure. "Are you saying that Brooks is behind all this?" Evelyn asked, disbelief lacing her voice. "He's been trying to intimidate me too. Make me back down." "I don't know yet," Mia replied, shaking her head. "But I'm digging deeper into his background. We have to be careful. If he's as deep in this as I think he is, going after him could be a mistake." Evelyn felt a chill. She wasn't about to let anyone push her into submission, not now. She had already crossed a line and there was no turning back, but she understood Mia's caution. Brooks wasn't just a cop, he was a part of the system. Going after him would draw unwanted attention, and it could put everything at risk. "I need to confront him," Evelyn said finally, the decision hanging in the air between them. Mia's eyes widened. "You're not thinking straight, Evelyn. Confronting Brooks could make everything worse. You have no idea how far this goes. These people, they're dangerous." "I don't have a choice," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "If I don't confront him now, it will only get worse. I can't let them win. They're already trying to destroy my career, my life. I need to know who's pulling the strings. I need answers, Mia." Mia looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, but be careful. This isn't just about the case anymore. It's about survival." Evelyn knew Mia was right. Every step she took now was a risk. But it was a risk she had to take. Later that day, Evelyn found herself standing in front of Detective Wade Brooks' office. The door was closed, and through the small window, she could see him inside, talking to someone on the phone. She could hear his low voice, but it was too muffled to make out the words. Her pulse raced as she knocked twice on the door. "Come in," he called, his voice cool and professional, but there was something in it that made her stomach tighten. Evelyn opened the door and stepped inside. Brooks looked up at her, his expression unreadable. He hung up the phone and gave her a polite nod. "Detective," she said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "We need to talk." Brooks leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "About what, Miss Watson? I think we've already covered everything relevant to the case." "No," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. "This isn't about the case. This is about you, and what's really going on." Brooks's expression flickered just for a second, before he returned to his neutral demeanor. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I don't have time for games, Miss Watson." Evelyn took a step closer, locking eyes with him. "You've been watching me. You've been following me, sending messages, trying to intimidate me. You're not just a cop in this. You're part of something much bigger. And I want to know why." For the first time, Brooks's cool exterior seemed to crack. His jaw clenched and his eyes darkened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he muttered under his breath. But before Evelyn could respond, the door to his office opened behind her. A familiar figure stepped inside, someone she wasn't expecting. Detective Brooks stood up as the figure entered, his expression changing to one of submission. It was the same man from the courtroom, the older man, with the graying hair, the sharp eyes. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Now she understood. She had crossed the line, and they were making sure she knew it. Evelyn's pulse raced as she stood in the doorway, her mind scrambling to piece together what was happening. The man who had been watching her in the courtroom, the same man who had made her feel like she was being hunted, was now standing right in front of her. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't just some random person caught up in the case. He was someone important, someone with power. The older man, with his sharp features and grey hair, walked into the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen it all and had nothing left to fear. His eyes flicked over to her, acknowledging her presence, but he made no effort to introduce himself. "Detective," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tension rising in her chest, "I think we need to talk." Brooks, still standing behind his desk, didn't move. He looked from Evelyn to the man beside him, then back to her, his expression unreadable. The older man, with his cold, calculating gaze, smiled faintly. "I think it's time we all had a conversation," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Before the man could answer, Brooks finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Evelyn, I suggest you sit down. This isn't something you can just walk into and walk out of. You need to understand the stakes here." For a moment, Evelyn hesitated, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her worst fear had come true. She wasn't just a part of a case anymore. She was a pawn in a game far larger than she could have ever imagined. The older man nodded to a chair, signaling for Evelyn to take a seat. She didn't want to give in to the power they were trying to exert over her, but she knew it was futile to resist. She had to hear what they had to say. She had to understand the depth of the trap she was caught in. As she sat down, the man introduced himself with a slow smile, as though savoring the moment. "My name is Raymond Blackwood. I'm afraid the details of your case aren't as straightforward as you've been led to believe." "Raymond Blackwood," Evelyn echoed, tasting the name on her tongue. It was unfamiliar, but there was something about that made her skin crawl. "What's your involvement in this?" What do you want from me? Blackwood's eyes glinted with amusement, as if the question was beneath him. What I want, he said, leaning in slightly, is simple. You've been asking too many questions, Evelyn. You've been digging where you don't belong. People like you don't just waltz in and start disrupting things. It's bad for business. Evelyn's mind raced. She had been right all along. There was a bigger power behind the case, a shadowy figure pulling the strings, orchestrating the drama from behind the scenes, and now she was in their sights. Business? Evelyn asked, struggling to keep her voice even. This isn't business. This is justice. People's lives are on the line. You can't just throw everything into chaos, because it's bad for your business. Blackwood chuckled, a low mocking sound. You really don't get it, do you? This is all business, everything is. Justice, law, power, it's all part of the game. And right now you're losing. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had known that the system was flawed, that there were people in positions of power who used their influence for their own gain. But she never imagined it would go this far. I'm not backing down, she said, her voice steady. I will fight this. No matter what. I don't care who you are or how deep your pockets go. I'll expose you. For a moment, Blackwood's smile faded. That's the problem with people like you, Evelyn. You think you can win this, but you're not in control here. I am. And if you continue to push, I'll make sure your career, your entire life gets destroyed. Evelyn's jaw clenched, her fists tightening in her lap. She could feel the walls closing in around her, but something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. Then come at me, she said, her voice hard, because I'm not going anywhere. Blackwood's eyes darkened, and for a moment, the tension in the room was so thick it felt like it might suffocate her. But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the tension evaporated. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. You're a strong woman, Evelyn, he said, his voice a little less mocking now. But strength isn't enough. You need more than that. You need to understand the game, and right now you don't. Evelyn stared at him, refusing to back down. I don't care about your game. What I care about is making sure the truth comes out, no matter what it costs. For a long moment, Blackwood said nothing. He simply studied her, as if weighing the options in his mind. Then with a sigh he stood up. All right, he said, his voice casual, as if they had just finished discussing the weather. If that's the way you want to play this, then fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. Evelyn didn't move as Blackwood turned toward the door, but just before he left, he paused and looked over his shoulder. Just remember, he said quietly, you're not as untouchable as you think. With that, he was gone. The room seemed to grow colder in his absence. Brooke stood behind his desk, not saying a word. Evelyn didn't want to look at him, didn't want to acknowledge the man who had been playing her all along. But she had no choice. Why, she asked, her voice trembling with anger. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Brooks met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I didn't have a choice, he said quietly. This isn't just about you or me. This is bigger than anything you can imagine. Then you've been lying to me, Evelyn spat. You've been manipulating me from the start. He didn't deny it. Instead, he just stared at her, as if the truth was a weight too heavy for either of them to bear. Evelyn stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't do this anymore. She had come here for justice, but what she had found was a web of lies. Lies spun by people who had no interest in the truth. She wasn't going to let them destroy her. She wasn't going to let them win. I'm done, she said, her voice steady. I'll take it from here. With that, she turned and walked. Out of the room, her mind made up. Whatever it took, she was going to expose them all. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. Evelyn could feel the weight of the decision she had just made, settling over her like a suffocating fog. The walls of the courthouse, once a symbol of justice, now seemed like towering giants looming over her, threatening to crush her with their weight. She had walked away from the confrontation with Raymond Blackwood and Detective Brooks, but she had no illusions about what she had just entered into. This was no longer about a case. This was about survival. As she walked down the dimly lit hall, her mind raced with the gravity of the situation. Blackwood's words echoed in her ears. You're not as untouchable as you think. The implication was clear. He would come for her. He would do whatever it took to make sure she didn't get the truth out. But Evelyn wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. She needed a plan, a way to hit back without risking everything. The problem was she didn't know who she could trust anymore. Everyone had their own agenda, and Evelyn was learning the hard way that even the people closest to her might not be as loyal as she thought. Mia was her first thought, her closest ally in this fight. But even Mia had been working in the shadows, pulling strings that Evelyn hadn't fully understood. Was she really safe? Or had she been drawn into a web of deceit too? With her mind clouded with doubts, Evelyn stepped out into the cool evening air. The sky above was dark, the stars obscured by a thick layer of clouds. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she made her way to her car. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional hum of traffic in the distance. Evelyn's fingers clenched around her keys as she walked briskly toward her vehicle. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside her, its headlights blinding her for a moment. She froze, her heart skipping a beat, every muscle in her body tensing in instinctive fear. The window rolled down and a familiar voice called out, "Evelyn, get in!" She didn't hesitate. Her body moved on its own, slipping into the passenger seat of Mia's car. The door slammed shut behind her with an unsettling finality. Mia was already looking at her, her face tight with worry. "They're going after you, Evelyn. You need to leave. Now." Evelyn's eyes widened. "What do you mean, leave? What's going on?" Mia's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I've been trying to find out more about Blackwood, about the people he's working with, but it's worse than we thought. They're on to you. We don't have time to figure out all the details. They'll be looking for you soon." Evelyn's pulse quickened. She hadn't realized just how much danger she was in until Mia's words hit her. She had been too focused on the case, too obsessed with uncovering the truth, to realize that her life was at risk. "What do you mean they're onto me?" Evelyn demanded, her voice sharp. "I thought you said you were working on the evidence, finding out who's behind all of this." "I am," Mia said quickly, "but they've been tracking us. They know everything. I've been getting threats too. Someone's been digging into my past and they're not going to stop until we're both destroyed." Evelyn's heart sank. She had trusted Mia. She had relied on her as the one constant in this nightmare. But now, with Mia's words hanging in the air, she realized just how deep the web went. It wasn't just Blackwood. There were other players involved, people who were willing to stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. "We have to go to the press," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with urgency. "We have to expose them now. If we wait any longer, it'll be too late." Mia shook her head. "No, that's exactly what they want. They'll shut it down before it even gets out. We have to be smarter than that. We have to think one step ahead of them." Evelyn stared at her, a sinking feeling in her stomach. Mia was right, of course. The system was rigged. Exposing them through the press would be useless. She had to find a way to take them down from within. But how? The answer hit her like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't about exposing the system to the world. It was about dismantling it from the inside. Evelyn had been looking at it all wrong. She couldn't go after the individuals in power directly. They were too entrenched, too dangerous. But she could make them turn on each other. She could use their own fear, their own insecurities, to make them destroy each other. "Okay," Evelyn said, her voice cold with determination. "We play it their way. We let them think they have control, and then we turn the tables. We make them come for each other." Mia blinked at her in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn's eyes gleamed. "The people behind Blackwood, they think they're untouchable, right? They've built this empire of lies, but no empire stands forever. If we start leaking information to the right people, people who have their own agendas, we can start a chain reaction. They'll turn on each other, trying to protect themselves, and that's when we strike." Mia's face broke into a slow smile. "You're thinking of using their greed and fear against them." "Exactly," Evelyn said, nodding. "I'll need you to keep digging into Blackwood's background, into anyone connected to him. We need to find weaknesses. I'll start building the connections. Once we have the evidence, we can start turning them against each other." The tension in the car seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Evelyn knew this was dangerous. Very dangerous, but it was the only way forward. If she kept playing by the rules they set, she'd never win. But if she played the game on her own terms, she could expose the truth without being crushed beneath it. "We'll have to move fast," Mia said. "They won't wait long before they come after us, but I'm in, let's take them down." As the car sped off into the night, Evelyn felt a sense of resolve wash over her. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, she was fighting for her life, and this time she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. The world outside felt like it was moving at a pace that Evelyn could no longer follow. Everything was slipping through her fingers, every lead, every clue, every possibility. She could feel the walls closing in, each step forward drawing her deeper into a labyrinth of lies and betrayal. And yet, in this chaos, one thing remained clear. She had to stay in control. The moment she lost that control, the moment she gave into the fear gnawing at her, it would be over. She sat in her apartment that night, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Her phone buzzed on the table in front of her. It was Mia, her message reading, "I've got something, meet me at the usual place in 30. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket and left, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. She had to make this work, had to make every move count. The usual place was a small out-of-the-way diner on the edge of town. No one ever came here unless they knew what they were looking for, which was exactly why Evelyn and Mia used it as their meeting spot. It was safe, quiet, and most importantly, unremarkable. As Evelyn walked through the door, she spotted Mia at their usual booth. Mia looked over her shoulder and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, her eyes wary. There was an edge to her expression that made Evelyn uneasy. "Have you found something?" Evelyn said, sliding into the booth across from her. Mia nodded, her gaze flicking to the door before she spoke. "I've been digging into Blackwood's past, like we talked about. He's not just some businessman pulling strings behind the scenes. He's got a history, a dirty one." Evelyn leaned in, her interest piqued. "What do you mean?" Mia's fingers drummed nervously on the table, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "I found a connection. Blackwood used to work with some pretty unsavory people who have ties to organized crime, money laundering, even some pretty high-profile disappearances. This isn't just about corporate corruption, it's about power, and about getting rid of anyone who stands in his way." Evelyn's heart raced. "So he's not just a corporate shark. He's dangerous." Mia's eyes met hers. "More than you can imagine. But here's the kicker, he's not acting alone. I've traced a lot of his connections back to a group of people in this city, people with serious influence in law enforcement. Politics and finance. If we're going to bring him down, we need to expose the whole network." Evelyn's mind raced as she processed what Mia was saying. This was bigger than she'd thought. It wasn't just about Blackwood. It was about a system of power and corruption that had infiltrated every corner of the city. And now Evelyn was standing at the center of it all, a single thread in a much larger web. "We need to get this information into the right hands," Evelyn said, her voice steady but urgent. "If we expose this, we can start taking them down from the inside out. But we have to move fast. They'll come for us the moment they catch wind of what we're doing." Mia nodded. "I agree, but we can't just walk into the media and spill everything. If we do, they'll shut it down before it gets any traction. We need a strategy." Evelyn leaned back in her seat, her mind working quickly, considering all the angles. "We play it smart. We leak information slowly. Give them just enough to get the wheels turning. Start with the police. They'll be the easiest to crack. Once we have a few names, we move on to the politicians. And then we tie it all back to Blackwood." Mia raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a war, Evelyn. A full-scale takedown." "I'm talking about survival," Evelyn replied quietly. "If we don't do this, we're both dead, and I'm not going down without a fight." The silence between them hung heavy for a moment, but there was a sense of understanding in Mia's eyes. She knew this was no longer just about the case. It was about a fight for their lives. The next few days were a blur of secrecy and tension. Evelyn and Mia worked in overdrive, piecing together information, reaching out to contacts who could help them, and slowly chipping away at the powerful people backing Blackwood. Every moment was a risk, but it was a risk Evelyn was willing to take. She wasn't going to let them destroy her, Not now, not when she was so close to bringing the truth to light. But even as they gathered evidence, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She had always felt like there was something just beyond her reach, something lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to slip up. And now it seemed like the walls were closing in even tighter. Every movement, every decision, every conversation felt like it was being monitored. Evelyn had learned long ago that in this world, trust was a fragile thing, and right now she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. She couldn't even trust Mia completely, not after everything that had happened, not after realizing just how deeply entangled they both were in this web of corruption. Mia had been with her from the start, yes, but how much did Mia truly know? How much was she holding back? As Evelyn stared out her apartment window late that night, she couldn't help but wonder if Mia was keeping secrets from her. Could she be a part of the network they were trying to bring down? Or was she too just another victim, like Evelyn? The only thing Evelyn was sure of was that if she was going to survive this, she had to trust no one, not even herself. The phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Mia. "They know. They're onto us. Get out now." Evelyn's blood ran cold. They had been right all along. The moment they started digging, they had marked themselves. And now there was no going back. She had to act quickly. She grabbed her bag, her heart pounding in her chest. The storm was coming, and she was right in the eye of it, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she read Mia's message for the third time. "They know, they're onto us. Get out now." A chill swept through her veins, the weight of the warning sinking in. This wasn't just a generic threat. This was the moment everything changed, the moment the shadows moved, and she could no longer hide in the dark. There was no time to think, no time to plan. She grabbed her phone, quickly firing off a message to Mia. "Where are you?" "I'm leaving now." Her phone buzzed almost immediately. "I'm on the move. Meet me at the warehouse." The warehouse. A place that had once been an insignificant piece of their plan. Now it felt like the only place left for them to hide. But Evelyn knew better than to trust it as a sanctuary. If they were being watched, and they were, there was no safe place for either of them now. As Evelyn stepped out of her apartment and into the cold, empty night, the world around her seemed to grow quieter, more oppressive. The streets, once familiar, now felt like a maze of unseen eyes. The city felt like it was holding its breath. The deep sense of danger was palpable, wrapping around her like a second skin. She got into her car, the engine roaring to life beneath, her fingertips. But as she pulled out of the parking lot, her mind raced. Who were they? Who had found them out? Was it Raymond Blackwood's people, or was it something or someone closer to home? Was there a mole in their ranks? She had thought Mia was the one person she could trust, but now that trust felt more fragile than ever. Her eyes scanned the dark streets around her, every passing car an enemy, every shadow a potential threat. She pushed the accelerator harder, urging her car faster toward the meeting spot, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. She glanced in her rearview mirror and saw a set of headlights far behind her. Her stomach twisted. It was too far to turn around now. She kept her foot on the gas, trying to shake the feeling of being hunted. But no matter how fast she drove, the sensation of being watched lingered, gnawing at her mind. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of town, tucked away in an industrial district far from the watchful eyes of the city center. The building was old, its metal walls rusted from years of neglect, but it still stood firm like a relic of a past long forgotten. As Evelyn pulled into the lot, she saw Mia's car parked near the entrance, the lights dimmed to avoid drawing attention. Evelyn parked her car next to Mia's and stepped out cautiously, her senses alert. There was no one in sight, but that didn't mean they were alone. She walked toward the door of the warehouse, her steps slow, deliberate, as if expecting something, or someone, to jump out at her at any moment. As she entered, the smell of damp concrete and old machinery hit her. The interior was cavernous, filled with crates and discarded tools. The faint hum of a flickering light overhead cast long shadows across the space, amplifying the sense of isolation. "Mia," Evelyn called, her voice echoing in the silence. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates, and Evelyn's breath caught in her chest. It wasn't Mia. It was Raymond Blackwood. Everything seemed to slow down in that instant. Evelyn's mind raced, trying to process the sight of him standing there, his expression cold and calculating. "Surprised to see me, Evelyn?" Blackwood's voice cut through the air like a blade. Her heart pounded in her chest, her body instinctively tensing. She had no weapon, no backup, no plan. She was cornered, but she wasn't going to show him fear, not now, not when everything she had worked for was on the line. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You really think I'm going to hand over everything just because you show up with a smug smile?" Blackwood chuckled, taking a slow step toward her. "You think this is about a case? About justice?" "No, Evelyn, this is about power. Power that you and your little friend Mia have decided to meddle with." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "Mia? Where is she?" "Don't worry," Blackwood said, his smile widening. "She's safe for now." The words were like a punch to the gut. "What have you done to her?" Evelyn's voice broke, the fear finally creeping into her tone. "Nothing yet," Blackwood said, his eyes narrowing, "but it's only a matter of time. You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Evelyn. You think you're the hero in this story? You're just another pawn. You and Mia both." Evelyn's mind raced. Mia wasn't here, but she had to be close. If Blackwood was using her as leverage, he'd need her alive, at least for now. That was her edge, her only edge. "You've underestimated me," Evelyn said, her voice low, defiant. "I won't stop. No matter what you do, I won't back down. I'm going to bring you down, Blackwood. Your empire of lies is crumbling, and you'll go down with it." Blackwood took a step closer, his face inches from hers. "I admire your bravery, Evelyn," he said softly, "but in the end, all your courage will do is get you killed." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Not now. She had to keep him talking. She had to buy time. "Why don't you just kill me now?" Evelyn challenged, her voice ice cold. "Why waste your time? You're running out of options." Blackwood's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Evelyn saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "I don't want to kill you, Evelyn," he said finally, his voice almost thoughtful. "Not yet, anyway." Before Evelyn could react, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the tense silence. A car door slammed, footsteps echoed in the warehouse, a shadow appeared in the doorway. It was Mia. Evelyn's pulse raced as Mia stepped into the warehouse, her face a mixture of defiance and fear. The air between her and Blackwood crackled with tension, as if the two were locked in a silent battle, each trying to control the narrative of the moment. Evelyn's mind whirred, trying to piece together the puzzle in front of her. Mia's eyes flicked to Evelyn and then to Blackwood before she finally spoke, her voice steady though tinged with uncertainty. "You're wasting your time, Blackwood," Mia said, her tone cold. "She's not the one you should be worried about." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. What did Mia mean by that? Blackwood's lips curled into a thin smile, his expression unreadable. "You think I'm afraid of a few threats, Mia? I've spent years building this empire, and you think I'm going to let a couple of spies tear it all down?" Evelyn's eyes shifted from Mia to Blackwood, trying to decipher their interaction. Was Mia really on her side, or had she been playing her the whole time? "Mia," Evelyn said, her voice edged with disbelief. "What is this? What's going on?" Mia's gaze met Evelyn's, and for the first time Evelyn saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the same steely determination that had always been there. "I had to make a choice, Evelyn," Mia said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of something unsaid. "I didn't want it to come to this, but Blackwood, he has leverage, more than you could imagine." Evelyn's mind spun. "Leverage?" she repeated. "What kind of leverage?" Mia didn't answer immediately. She stood there, her body tense, her eyes flicking between Evelyn and Blackwood. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Mia sighed, stepping forward. "I've been working with Blackwood for a while," she admitted, her voice low. "I didn't have a choice. He had people in my life, people I couldn't protect." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, the sting of betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. "You were working with him all along," she whispered, the words tasting bitter. "All this time I trusted you." Mia looked away, guilt and pain flashing across her face. "I didn't want to, Evelyn. But you don't understand, Blackwood, he's not just a businessman. He's part of something bigger. And I was trapped. I didn't know how deep it went. Until it was too late." Blackwood chuckled darkly from where he stood, his arms crossed, watching the exchange like it was a show. "It's always the same with you, Mia. Always looking for an excuse. But at the end of the day, you're just like everyone else, weak." Evelyn took a step back, her mind racing. Mia had been a part of the network all along, and now she was standing here, in front of Blackwood, trying to explain herself. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was more to this story than Mia was letting on. "Why should I believe you, Mia?" Evelyn asked, her voice harsh, the betrayal lacing her words. "You've been lying to me from the beginning. How do I know you're not still working for him? Maybe you're just trying to save your own skin." Mia winced, but her eyes hardened. "You think I'm doing this for me? I'm trying to help you, Evelyn. I'm trying to keep you alive." Blackwood let out a low laugh. "Help her? You're both delusional. You think you can take me down? You think you can stop what's coming? This game is bigger than both of you." Evelyn turned her back on Blackwood, focusing on Mia. "What exactly is this game, Mia? What's really going on?" Mia hesitated, looking toward Blackwood before speaking. Again, her voice quieter, almost reluctant. "You need to understand, Evelyn. Blackwood is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There's a network, a shadow organization that controls everything in this city. They control the police, the media, the government. Blackwood's just the face, but behind him, there are people who want to control everything." Evelyn's mind reeled as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. A network, a powerful, far-reaching group with influence over the very systems meant to protect people. Blackwood, Mia, all of it was part of something much more sinister than she had imagined. "You've known about this all along, haven't you?" Evelyn said, her voice tight. "You knew what you were getting into when you started this, and now you're trying to clean up the mess." Mia looked pained, but she didn't deny it. "I didn't know the extent of it, Evelyn. I thought I could protect you, that we could expose Blackwood and take him down. But now I see the truth. It's not just about him, it's about something much bigger, and I can't just walk away from it." Blackwood's laughter interrupted them. "You really think you're in control here? You think you can expose me and take down this organization? You're both fools. You're nothing but pawns in a game that's already been decided." Evelyn's heart pounded as she stared at Blackwood, her mind racing with the realization that they were on the edge of something dangerous. The battle for control had just begun, and if they were going to survive, they would have to navigate the treacherous web of lies and manipulation that had ensnared them all. The question was no longer whether they could defeat Blackwood. It was whether they could even trust each other long enough to take down the network behind him. Outside, the night air felt heavier, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Every moment felt like the calm before a storm, but Evelyn knew the worst was yet to come. The stakes were higher than ever. One wrong move and everything they'd worked for could come crashing down, and Evelyn was determined that wouldn't happen. She just didn't know who, if anyone, she could trust anymore. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating. Evelyn could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. The truth was out now, the network, Blackwood, Mia's involvement, but there was still so much she didn't understand. Every question she asked only seemed to raise more doubts. Was Mia truly trying to help her? Or was this all part of a game, a more complex manipulation she hadn't even begun to understand? Mia stood off to the side, her posture stiff, her eyes avoiding Evelyn's gaze. Evelyn's heart ached at the sight. She wanted to believe Mia, she needed to, but the jagged edges of betrayal cut too deep. "How do I know you're not still working for him?" Evelyn asked again, her voice low but laced with anger. "How do I know you won't turn on me the second we walk out of here?" Mia flinched, her eyes flickering with pain before she finally met Evelyn's gaze. "Because I'm not the enemy, Evelyn. I'm trying to help you, to stop all of this before it gets worse. But you have to trust me. And I know I don't deserve that trust right now. Evelyn shook her head. You don't, not yet, but I'm still listening. Blackwood's smirk twisted into something darker as he moved toward them, his boots echoing against the cold concrete floor. Isn't this touching? The betrayed and the betrayer bonding over their shared lies. He looked at Mia with contempt. You really think you can stop what's coming, Mia? You're nothing but a pawn in a game too big for you to understand. Mia's face hardened at Blackwood's words, but Evelyn could see the flicker of fear behind her eyes. It was the first crack in Mia's usually unflappable exterior. Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if Mia was afraid of Blackwood, or something bigger that she still hadn't revealed. You don't understand anything, Blackwood, Mia spat, her voice suddenly stronger. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I've seen the darkness you control, and I know it's only a matter of time before the world sees it too. The tension in the room thickened, the air so tight it felt like it could snap at any moment. Evelyn stepped closer to Mia, her mind whirling with thoughts she couldn't quite process. There was a moment, just a fleeting second, where it seemed like Mia might be telling the truth. She wasn't just here to save herself, she was here to stop Blackwood. But the question remained, at what cost? You think the world is going to just wake up and see the truth? Blackwood's voice was a low growl now, full of malice. The people who control this city, they don't care about you or Mia or anyone else. They care about power. And you're both too naive to understand that. The truth won't save you, it will destroy you. Evelyn stood firm, meeting Blackwood's gaze with newfound resolve. Maybe it's time for the world to destroy you instead. Blackwood's lips curled into a sneer, but before he could respond, a noise from outside the warehouse caught everyone's attention. A screech of tires. The sound of boots hitting the gravel. Suddenly, the door to the warehouse slammed open, and a group of men dressed in black tactical gear flooded into the space. Evelyn's pulse spiked. They weren't just thugs. They were his men, the enforcers. Of the network Blackwood controlled. They were here for something, or someone. Blackwood's smile faltered for a split second, but then it returned colder than before. Well, well, he said, turning to face the new arrivals. Looks like the cavalry has arrived. Evelyn's mind raced. She could feel the danger. Closing in around her, the walls tightening. They had to move, they had to get out of here. But there were too many of them, and she wasn't sure who she could trust anymore. Mia? Was she really on her side? Or was she just leading them into a trap? Get out of here, Evelyn shouted to Mia, taking a step toward the shadows near the back of the warehouse. Now! Mia didn't move. Her gaze locked on the men entering the warehouse, and Evelyn saw her body tense, her fists clenching. I can't leave you, Mia said, her voice unwavering. You don't understand, Evelyn. They've been watching us. They're here because of me. What? Evelyn's heart dropped. What do you mean they're here because of you? I was the one they were really after all along, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. They know I've been trying to take them down. I was the one who pushed too hard, and now they've come to make sure I can't stop them. The reality hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. Mia wasn't just a pawn caught between two sides. She had been the target from the beginning, and now, with Blackwood's men closing in, their options were running out fast. Blackwood, Evelyn shouted, her voice rising in the chaos. This isn't over, you hear me? This is just the beginning. But Blackwood didn't flinch. Instead, he motioned toward the enforcers, who stepped forward, weapons drawn. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape route. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She and Mia were trapped, surrounded by enemies they couldn't fight off alone. But Evelyn wouldn't give up. Not yet. Not now. Mia was right. They couldn't stop Blackwood and his network on their own, not with the odds stacked so heavily against them. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to turn the tables. The men were closing in. The tension in the room was unbearable, a powder keg waiting for the slightest spark. And then, in that moment of utter chaos, something unexpected happened. A gunshot rang out. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, its deafening sound reverberating. Off the walls, filling the air with a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. For a split second, everything stopped. Even Blackwood's enforcers froze, their weapons still raised, their eyes darting in confusion. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest, and for a brief moment she didn't know whether to run or stay. The silence that followed was pregnant with anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the chaos resumed. One of Blackwood's men fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in pain. Blood poured from the wound, pooling on the concrete floor as he groaned in agony. For a second, Evelyn couldn't process what had happened. Who had shot him? Was it Mia? Had she betrayed her again? The enforcer's attention shifted to the injured man, their focus momentarily distracted. Evelyn seized the opportunity, instinctively grabbing Mia's arm and pulling her toward the shadows. The chaos had momentarily tilted the balance, but it wouldn't last long. Blackwood would regain control soon enough. Who shot him? Evelyn demanded in a harsh whisper, her eyes scanning the warehouse, looking for any sign of the shooter. Mia's face was pale, her eyes wide with surprise. I don't know, she stammered. That wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't supposed to go down like this. Evelyn's mind raced. There were too many variables now, too many unknowns. She didn't know if Mia was being truthful, but something told her that whatever happened next, it wasn't part of the plan. They had. This was different. And Blackwood was too calm, too controlled in the midst of the chaos. "Get down!" a voice shouted, suddenly interrupting her thoughts. Evelyn barely had time to react as a hail of gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the walls. She shoved Mia down behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding as she pressed herself against the cold concrete. The sound of gunshots, the screams and the shouts of Blackwood's men were deafening. Mia's breath was shallow beside her, her face drawn with fear. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she repeated, her voice shaking. "This wasn't part of the plan." Evelyn's mind whirled, trying to make sense of the situation. She had trusted Mia. She had believed that together they could stop Blackwood. But now the entire plan was falling apart. They were under attack, and she wasn't sure who was on their side anymore. A loud thud echoed through the warehouse, followed by the sound of a body hitting the ground. Another shot rang out, and Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough," he bellowed. "I'm not playing games anymore. If you want to die, stay where you are. If you want to live, start listening to me." His voice was smooth, calm, almost as though he were giving orders in a boardroom, instead of commanding a group of armed enforcers in the middle of a firefight. Evelyn could feel the weight of his words, the power in them. It was as if he controlled everything, every movement, every decision. And she and Mia, they were nothing but pawns in his game. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the other side of the warehouse, where the shadows hid the source of the gunfire. Whoever had fired the shot had done so with precision. It hadn't been random, and the more Evelyn thought about it, the more she realized that this was bigger than just Blackwood. There was another player in the game. "You need to trust me." "Evelyn," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to believe that I'm not the enemy." Evelyn's eyes were locked on the chaos unfolding in front of them. She wanted to trust Mia. She really did. But the truth was, trust was a fragile thing. She had given Mia her trust once before, only to be blindsided by the revelation that Mia had been working with Blackwood. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Evelyn muttered, her voice tight with frustration. "I don't even know who's shooting at us or why." Mia's grip on her arm tightened. "It's not Blackwood's men. Someone else is here, someone who wants him out of the picture, and I'm pretty sure they're on our side." Evelyn's eyes snapped to Mia. "What are you talking about? Who else is here?" But before Mia could answer, another shot rang out and Blackwood's voice broke through the chaos again, this time laced with fury. "Enough of this!" Blackwood shouted, his rage palpable. "I'm going to end this right now! Get them!" The enforcers moved quickly, swarming toward their position. Evelyn's pulse spiked. This was it. They were running out of time. "Come on!" Evelyn hissed, grabbing Mia's hand and pulling her to her feet. "We need to move now, or we're dead." Mia hesitated for a split second, her eyes darting around. "I think they're—" But she never finished her sentence. Another shot rang out, this time from a different direction. One of Blackwood's enforcers dropped to the ground, dead before he even hit the floor. The remaining enforcers hesitated, looking around for the source of the shots. It was clear now that they weren't the only ones in the warehouse. Someone else was making their move. "We need to find out who's helping us," Evelyn said urgently. "And we need to find them now." But Mia was already moving. "I know who it is," she said, her voice steady now as if she had already figured out the puzzle. "We're not alone in this. That's why they're trying to kill us." Evelyn didn't ask for any more details. The realization that they had an ally, someone on the outside who was working against Blackwood, gave her the surge of hope she desperately needed. They darted toward the far exit of the warehouse, weaving through the piles of crates and debris. Every step felt like a race against time, and Evelyn knew they couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. One wrong move, and it would all be over. As they neared the exit, Mia pulled her to a halt. "Wait," she whispered. "This is it. This is where we meet them." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The shadows outside were thick with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: they weren't alone, and just maybe they had a chance after all. The cold air outside the warehouse hit Evelyn like a slap in the face. Her breath misted in the chill as she and Mia moved quickly through the shadows, the sounds of chaos still echoing behind them. Every instinct in Evelyn's body screamed that they weren't safe yet, that something was coming to finish what had been started. She didn't know who their ally was, but right now, it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting out of here, alive. She had come too far. She'd already lost too much. She couldn't afford to fail now. They reached the edge of the property, where the moonlight barely illuminated a small, beat-up car parked behind a row of dumpsters. The figure leaning against it was cloaked in darkness, but there was no mistaking the silhouette. It was a man, a big man, with a posture that screamed confidence and control. "Is this the friend who's going to save us?" Evelyn muttered to Mia, eyeing the figure suspiciously. Her hand instinctively hovered over her side where the gun was hidden just in case. Mia nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes was hard to miss. "This is it. This is our only chance." As they approached, the man stepped forward into the dim light, revealing a face Evelyn would never forget. It was someone she had seen only in passing before, someone who had seemed so unimportant in the grand scheme of things that she hadn't thought to remember his name. But now here he was, standing in front of her like an unexpected ghost from the past. "Jason?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was sure she had seen him. In the network's inner circle, an investigator who had worked for the government, or so she thought. But now he looked different, harder, more dangerous. Jason's lips curved into a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You weren't supposed to find me, but I guess Blackwood underestimated you." Evelyn's mind was spinning. You've been working against Blackwood this whole time?" He nodded, his expression grim. "For longer than you know. I've been infiltrating his network from the inside, but I needed someone like you to take him down. You're the only one who can stop him now." "Stop him?" Evelyn echoed. "You think we can just walk away from this? He has connections everywhere. Jason, there's no one who isn't in his pocket." "Not anymore," he said, his voice low and steady. "The only reason Blackwood is still standing is because of the people who choose to protect him. But they won't for long. They've been watching you, Evelyn, and they've seen the power you hold. That's why he was so eager to break you." Mia's eyes flickered between them, a strange tension in the air. "So what now? You want us to take him down for good?" Jason's face hardened. "We're running out of time. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. Blackwood has allies everywhere, but I have a way to bring him down. You just need to follow my lead." Evelyn hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. But one thing was clear. They were past the point of no return. The game had already been set in motion, and there was no going back. If they didn't make their move now, they'd all be crushed under Blackwood's heel. "All right," she said, her voice firm, though doubt still clung to her words. "What's the plan?" Jason's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "The information you've gathered is enough. We just need one final piece, the evidence that proves Blackwood's ties to the people in power. Without it, we have nothing." Evelyn's blood ran cold. The final piece. The one thing that had always been just out of reach. "You have it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Jason nodded, then pulled out a small flash drive from his pocket, holding it up between them. "It's all here. Names, dates, transactions, everything. It's the smoking gun that'll bring him down." Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of distant sirens cut through the quiet night air. Her heart leaped into her throat. Too late. Jason muttered, his expression hardening. "They've already called for backup. We have to move now." Evelyn glanced at Mia, who looked as lost as she felt. The uncertainty in Mia's eyes mirrored her own. Could they trust Jason? Could they trust anyone? "Come on," Jason barked, pulling Evelyn and Mia into motion. "There's a safe house not far from here. We'll need to lay low until we figure out how to expose Blackwood. We don't have much time." They sprinted toward the car, the sound of their footsteps loud against the pavement as the sirens grew closer. Evelyn's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, betrayals, alliances, and what lay ahead. Blackwood wasn't just a man anymore. He was a force, a system of corruption so deeply ingrained that it felt like a part of the very fabric of the world. And if they were going to take him down, they had to outsmart the entire system. As they piled into the car, Jason took the wheel, his hands steady as he started the engine. The tires squealed as they tore off into the night, the shadows of the city swallowing them whole. Evelyn stared out the window, her mind racing. This was the endgame. Everything they had done, everything they had fought for, had led to this moment. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The final piece, the one thing that would bring everything into focus, the truth, was still just out of reach. But for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could win. As the car sped through the dark streets, Evelyn realized that Blackwood's kingdom was already beginning to crumble. The end was near. But it wasn't just the end of Blackwood. It was the beginning of something else, the beginning of freedom. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?